that down a little bit. So, this is something you've probably heard of before. Let's get into a little bit more detail on it at the AP bio level. So, a mitochondria has two membranes, okay? So, it's going to have an outer membrane, which you should be drawing this with me, okay? Right now, if you just write two membranes, that's enough. Now, the outer membrane is pretty much this part right here, but it has an inner membrane that has a lot more surface area, and it gets that surface area by sort of having all these folds, okay? And so it's got an inner compartment and an outer compartment. So I kind of want you to know the names of those. So if you're just taking notes by drawing with me, I think that'll be good enough for you, okay? At least for this section. So let's talk about what these parts are called, okay? We have the matrix, which is that inner space, okay, inside of there. And then we have the inner membrane space. So look, inner membrane space is right here. The matrix is inside of here. So make sure you're labeling that stuff with me, okay? So if you make a label diagram, you know you've taken the notes. You've got the words online. You don't have to worry about writing down the words. I think the pictures help you a lot more. Okay. Am I good to go? You keeping up? Or wait a second. No, 1 second? No problem. So you guys at home who are watching this online, I know it might seem kind of corny, but just going through and drawing this with me while you're watching this online, I think would be great. All right, I think everyone's caught up with me. Here's a much more beautiful drawing than what I can do. These cartoons, just remember that these little biology cartoons are sort of false colored. Mitochondria are not this bright, vivid red and yellow. But this is what I drew. You've got that outer membrane, which is kind of right here. And then below it, you've got that inner membrane space between the two membranes, like interstate, inner membrane. And this inner membrane is called the cristae. Go ahead and label that. It will be on one of our other slides, but all that sort of like wavy part on the inside is called, like these are called the cristae. There's these humps, okay? Cristae means crest, like the crest of a mountain or a wave or whatever. And here's sort of the electron microscope picture of it over here, where you can see all the membrane surface area, okay? So if we laid all these end to end, we would have a huge sort of sheet of surface area. Why is that? This thing is doing lots and lots of chemical reactions, and all that surface area helps concentrate those chemicals in the right place. Things are crossing membranes. There's little molecular pumps that are moving things across membranes, and it's a busy little place in your cell. Okay, let's talk about that inner membrane. I just told you this, but you can label those things as cristae, okay? If you can see them behind my picture. All right. Now, this is kind of interesting here. The more work or energy that cell is involved with, the greater that surface area will be. So if you had a cell that was really active, like a neuron or a muscle cell, those are super high energy using cell tissues. So you'll see a lot more folds and a lot more, you'll just see a lot more mitochondria in those cells because they have a lot more work to do. You see a cell that's very passive or doesn't do much, maybe like a fat cell or something that just doesn't use as much energy. You won't see as much folding. So you might see, more spread out. Now, there's a lot of enzymes storing things in here, and we're going to get into all these reactions. This all has to do with cellular respiration. Cellular respiration. My picture's in the way again. So cellular respiration's happening in the mitochondria. So this is where you get all those ATPs from glucose, oxygen going in, and then you get CO2 and ATP out, and water as well. So we'll cover that in great detail when we do energy. So like I just said, your ATP is generated here for the most part. So eukaryotes have mitochondria, prokaryotes don't. So eukaryotes much more adapted for high energy situations. Okay, pacing okay? Thank you guys. All right, so look, the whole unit we're talking about structure and function. So I just told you the structure, like it's got an outer membrane, inner membrane, cristae, matrix, intermembrane space. So now let's talk about what it does, okay? I told you this already, but just kind of formally going over it. This is where we have cellular respiration, and we're going to basically release energy from food in the form of glucose, okay? After photosynthesis is probably one of the most important biological reactions out there. This happens in everything from mushrooms to grass to cows to humans to, any eukaryote. Like I said just a second ago, this is where most of your ATP comes from. Now, how many of you have heard this one before? Okay, powerhouse of the cell. We're going to try to not use that term anymore. First of all, if I said draw a powerhouse and explain what it does, where would I find a powerhouse? What's the closest powerhouse to Dublin? Nobody even knows what a powerhouse is. It's just sort of like a leftover word from elementary or junior high teachings about the cell. We're not going to use that phrase if we can avoid it at all. Please don't ever write that on a test that I give you, okay? Because powerhouse doesn't really have a definition. Now, it does generate ATP, but some people will draw them like batteries and things like that. We just want to take it. We want to get rid of that sort of concept. Okay. A little bit more about mitochondria. They have their own ribosomes, and more importantly, this is very cool, they have their own DNA, and I think I may have told you this already outside of a video, but if you're watching the video and you missed this, why do they have their own DNA? All right, this is supposed to be an egg cell, and over here I'm going to draw a sperm cell. So when fertilization happens, sperm meets the egg, and it only inserts its chromosomes into the egg. The sperm cell has a mitochondria, but it doesn't put it in the egg. So after we get a sperm and egg together, we get what's called this is a zygote, or a fertilized egg. And whose mitochondria is this? Okay, so we have, like I said, we have the sperm, we've got the egg. Whose mitochondria is this? That belongs to mom. So all of your mitochondrial DNA is from mom. And geneticists and biologists love this. Okay, let me tell you why. Let's draw a quick pedigree. If you remember, females are circle, males are squares, okay? So I'm going to concentrate on this female side here. It's supposed to be a square. Square, circle. Whoops, I didn't put a child here. I should put this line should be going over here. Okay, yeah, let me back that up. All right. square, circle, square, circle. So all these females right here have the same mitochondrial DNA, okay? So we can really use this in some interesting ways. This doesn't mutate very often, and it definitely doesn't change because there's no mixing of genetic material from mom and dad. So if I ask you, like, whose DNA do you have more of? You have just a little bit more of mom's because of that mitochondrial factor. So if you're a female and you have, well, even if you're male, you always have mom's mitochondrial DNA on mom's side. So this would be mom, grandma, great-grandma on mom's side, great-great-grandma. And so we can look back at that and we can see where your female ancestry originated. An example of this might be humans migrated or immigrated into, I think it'd migrate would be right, into North America, thousands of years ago. And that was probably a very, very small group that entered North America. So we can all Native Americans probably have very similar mitochondrial DNA compared to other groups of people like Europeans or Asians. Now, they are descended from Asian people, but they've been separated for so long that we might be able to find out distinct lines of mitochondrial DNA as we go through generation and generation and generation. This does mutate at a very well-known rate, so we can tell how old these mitochondrial DNA lines are. If you do one of these genetic services like 23andMe or wherever, where you send in a sample and they analyze your genes, they'll tell you where your female ancestors are from. Pretty cool stuff. They can do it with males too, with the Y chromosome, but you have to have a Y chromosome. So if you're female, we don't know where your males are from. You'd have to get one from your brother or your dad or something. Okay, these guys can reproduce on their own, which we think is evidence of endosymbiosis. That's where we believe that there were cells that had other cells move inside of them. And so we think mitochondria and chloroplasts are evidence of that. That's what I just told you. Likely independent cells at once and moved in with endosymbiosis. SIS. Okay. Endosymbiosis. Okay. I'm going to go ahead on to chloroplasts. This will be pretty quick. And it's going to be quick because chloroplasts have tons of the same features as mitochondria. Okay. They have two outer membranes. So you're going to see membrane and a very, 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 very close together membrane. So two outer membranes. So the inner membrane, there's a lot more going on. So in between, write the word stroma and point to this area right here. There's lots of different spots and structures in here, and they can get a little hard to keep track of. Okay, so a good labeled diagram will really help you right here. Try to draw mine up here out of the way. Stroma is right there. And so you've got a inner membrane and outer membrane. All right, here's a better picture than what I can draw. Here's your electron microscope over here. I think the cartoons help you understand it a little bit better. We have that inner and outer membrane. I'm just going to kind of follow along up here. And then you have what are called thylakoids. Thylakoids are kind of these, they look like green cookies or donuts. And they're stacked up into stacks. So this is the thylakoid. ID. And a stack of thylakoids is called Agronum, okay, which you can't read that, but the word is right here and here. Okay, so these are where chloroplasts are. Chloro means green, and as you know, photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast, and they named it chloroplast because it was green. And most plants are green because of that. Here in the fall, in Ohio, those chloroplasts are lost in the leaves and other secondary pigments remain, and that's how we get these beautiful fall colors that seem to be peaking this week. Okay. I see some people still sketching. Yeah.
Wait, so what part is the stroma?
So the stroma, it's hard to see. Okay, I'm glad you asked that. Let me make some sort of... So it looks like it's pointing to just whatever. So if you look at these two, see how there are two membranes right here? The stroma is the place between the membranes, which you can kind of see better on the electron microscope. So that's the... Good question, good question. And then you've got, these are thylakoids, and a stack of them is agrana. Okay, then we're going to talk about those briefly. So there's these little green cookies. They're actually little sacs that chemical reactions happen in. So again, more membranes called thylakoids. So a single green disc or cookie or whatever you want to call it is called a thylakoid. A stack of thylakoids is called agrana. One thylakoid, okay? A stack is called agrana. Okay. This is where the chlorophyll lives. Okay, what are the functions of these guys? Probably the most important chemical reaction on Earth when it comes to life. It's where photosynthesis happens. Chloroplast is where photosynthesis happens. Okay, so that's their main function. Whoops. It's pretty basic. So just write photosynthesis. By now, I think you know what the light in the food part. Okay, you should know that at this point in your education. So let's talk about chloroplasts. Just like mitochondria, they have their own little ribosomes. Just like mitochondria, they have their own DNA. And just like mitochondria, they can reproduce by themselves. So they're about the same size, they do a lot of the same things, they're both sort of energy-based organelles. They do reactions that are just the opposite of one another. Now those happen a lot differently, but we think they are also an endosymbiosis origin, okay, where we had one type of prokaryote move into the other and they started setting up specialized roles. All right. They often have starch in them. Now that is a little bit different than mitochondria. So these up here are mitochondria characteristics. It's supposed to be mito. The other one is not, okay? The mitochondria don't make starch. Okay. These guys, through endosymbiosis, were likely what we call cyanobacteria. What color is cyan? It's kind of like a bluish, right? So it's a bluish green, so that's where that cyano comes from, and it comes from the coloring of chloroplasts. All righty.